takes 36 cranks to crank the gear up and 36 to crank it down. And I think we had to crank the flaps down on the other side. And then one day when we were doing night flying at a field that was near the Mexican border down near San Diego. And I can't remember the name of that place, but it was a little air base where they sent us to do night flying. And so our squadron went down there, and we used the Salton Sea as a target. And we only flew at night, and they had little smudge pots there. And our whole squadron would go up. The torpedo pilots would take off. The skipper was a torpedo pilot. And they would take off. And we had a whole line of airplanes. There were 30 of us. 15 fighter planes, 15 torpedo planes. And and it was dark. I mean, it was really dark. And as each skipper was number one man out. And when he got out and on the runway, then the next guy would get out, and we did that until all of us were out, and we would count so many. It seems like when the guy took off ahead of you, we'd wait a certain amount of time, not a few seconds, and then we'd take off. And the only thing you could see would be the lights on his airplane. Then the skipper would go way out and then come back over the field, and we'd all rendezvous as he got closer, and finally the whole formation would be there. Then we'd go up, and the torpedo people would drop bombs. We had smudge pots out there so we could see where it was. And we fighter pilots would shoot our machine guns, and shoot the dickens out of everything. And sometimes it would look to me like the bullets were coming right over my wing from the guy that was flying next to me. Anyway, then when we would come back to land, and we were there for a few weeks, just flying at night. And every once in a while, when you're coming into land and you're circling, all they had was smudge pots. They didn't have any field lights. And we would, I know that I would turn on my headlights. They were so bright that it flashed back, and boy, it blinded me. So none of us flew with those lights on. But every once in a while, you'd look down and you see a guy landed, and you see sparks going. The guy had ground looped, and he was dragging a wing, And it wasn't easy because the landing gear on the F4F is very narrow, and it is easily can ground loop. But when we got overseas, before we got overseas, we got a whole new bunch of planes, and they were all the FM2s. Now, I think that the Grumman F4F originally had about only 1,200 horsepower. And the FM2 had about 1,500 horsepower, which made a tremendous difference, that bit of horsepower. The Hellcat, of course, had over 2,000. And we still in the FM2 still had to crank all the gear and all the flaps, and then our cowl flaps, and everything was manual. And flying the old FM2, the old F4F, I remember getting into a dive. I was by myself, getting in several times into a dive and trying to pull out. I had to use both hands to pull that stick back, to pull out of that thing. The pressure on the elevators was so great, I only weighed 115 pounds when I was flying. I was afraid they were going to kick me out because I was too small. But when I was flying the fighter planes, I must have had a pretty fast plane because I only weighed 135 pounds then. And it wasn't until I got married after I got out of the service that I went up to 175 and stayed there, And a funny thing is that when I came back, we had a bunch of German prisoners on the base, and they just roamed all over the place, but in formation. And I was going down to the flight line one time, and here came this big line of German prisoners marching in the other direction. I think they were twos or threes or something. So we walked by shoulder to shoulder, and I looked at one kid, and he looked like he was about 14 years old. He was a German prisoner. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and we both kept going, and we both stopped after about 10 feet and turned around and looked back, because I looked like I was about 15 years old, and when I would go on leave, people would look at me, and I'd have my uniform and medals on. They couldn't believe that I was for real, and I'd get some pretty dirty looks.
Well, how old were you at that time?
I was 22 or 23. No, I was 20. Yeah, I was 23, because in Melbourne, I had come back. I had been assigned to instruct instructors, one from Pensacola and one from Corpus, and they had 4 new ensigns that had just graduated, but none of them had ever flown a real fighter plane. So I was taking them on a 6-month syllabus to and then take them out in the Atlantic and land on a carrier. No more of this little paddle wheel stuff. This was a actual Kaiser-built carrier. They were the small ones, but anyway. So anyway, we got out on the flight line. I was flying the Hellcat, and I had these 6 guys that I had to go through a syllabus with on. And so one day, I had them out on a gunnery run out in the Gulf, the Gulf of Mexico. And we were out there, and my plane was acting up, so I picked up the bike, and I said, "You guys keep doing what you're doing." I said, "I've got to go back. I've got to get another plane, and I'll come back as soon as I can." So they continued what they were doing. One of them was towing a target. They were doing high sides and all kinds of stuff on the target. So I came in and landed, and I told them what was wrong with the plane. I said, "I got to get another plane real quick, because my guys are out there, and I got to get back to them." They said, "Well, that plane over there," the Hellcat, he says, "it's all ready to go." So I said, "Great." So I just jumped in it and took off. And when I got to the Gulf, a terrible storm had come in. I didn't know it could come in that fast. But they told us all to come in. Well, my group I couldn't find them. They all had come in. All the planes had come in. And it started raining and thundering and lightning. And it was so bad that I had to disconnect my headset. And the thunder and the lightning were all around, And so I knew that if I flew east, I would hit the coast of Florida. So and the storm is down to where I'm only flying at about 200 feet. So I hit the coast of Florida, and I said, "Yeah, I know I got to turn and go north." And the air base at Melbourne is right on the edge of the ocean. There was the highway, the Biscayne, I think it's the Biscayne Highway, that was right there, and then the ocean was there, and it goes from Maine clear down to Miami. And so I hit that, and I thought, my word, and the storm's coming down and down, and I'm only flying at about 100 feet, and I hit the highway, and so I turned north, and there are tens of thousands of cars stopped. It's raining so hard that the windshield wipers, it's like pouring a fire hose on the front of the car. And I had my headset disconnected, and I looked at I just glanced over it, my fuel tank was empty. And I thought, oh my Lord, here I am in this storm, and I'm flying just over the rooftops of thousands of cars, and my base is on the left, and I don't know if I'm, so I said to myself, well, this big prop is going to stop at any second now, and you're flying over cars. So I flew over to the right edge. It's jungle on both sides. And I thought, as soon as that thing quits, I'm just going to hit right rudder, shove the stick forward, and dive it into the ground. I didn't want to be wounded because I knew it'd be a long time since if anybody could ever get over to me. And I didn't want to suffer. So I knew I was just going to dive it right in. And I kept looking at that prop, and I'd look at that gas tank, and it was way in the red. And I was flying, and I kept flying. And I thought, oh, I've turned the wrong way. I should have gone south. But everything told me I should have gone north. But I can't turn around now. That'd be stupid because I'd never get back where I started from. And so I'm thinking any second now I'm going to have to dive this plane into the ground. And I looked up and I saw a lake. And I said, now I know I'm lost. I've flown this place many times and there was never a lake there. And I looked again and there was a tower there. And I looked again and I saw hangars. And I said, oh my gosh, that's my base. If I could just get over these cars, and I'm thinking about this all myself. I didn't want to crash into a bunch of cars. And I looked at my speed and I thought, I think I've got enough that I can make it across. And the fence was right there at the edge of where all the cars were going south and the others were going north. And so I crossed over and I thought, oh, I made it. And I dropped my gear and I dropped my flaps and I could see the runway. And I hit the runway and it was just like a water landing and the water went all over the place. And this time I had the hatch open and locked again, because we always landed with it open anyway and took off. And I thought, oh my Lord, I made it again. And I taxied off and my engine quit. There was nobody around. One guy came running out of the hangar. He was the plane captain of this plane, and he was wondering where that plane was, And so he jumped up on my wing, and he told, and I just jumped out of it, and he had to get a tractor to tow it up to the where the hangars were. And I got out, and of course I was soaking wet because it was running so hard. I went up to my room in the BOQ, and I just laid on my bed, and I thanked the good Lord again. I couldn't have gone any further. Our squadron now was VC 83, 79. The carrier was 83. We were VC 79. There's a hat behind you there that has that on it. So we were told that we were leaving, I think it was the 4th of July of 1944. And we were going to be going down on this carrier. It wasn't our carrier. Our carrier was already overseas and was taking Japanese prisoners. They had the hangar deck rigged up as a prison, so that and that's where they kept the Jap prisoners. But anyway, we took this one carrier that ferried our whole squadron over to Hawaii, and to Opalaka, I think it was. And then we were there for a short time, and then we were told that our carrier was out in the Pacific, and we were to land aboard, and then we were all set to go to war. So that's what we did. And let's see, after that, we were assigned quarters aboard the carrier, and we took our gear, and that was our new home for the better part of a year now. So we were flying combat air patrols and anti-sub patrols. And the torpedo pilots, we would fly wing, sometimes we would fly wing on, fighter pilot would fly wing on the torpedo planes while they were searching for submarines in case we had an enemy plane come on. And then we would have fighter planes at each quadrant because we were now protecting about 10 or a dozen aircraft tankers. These were diesel tankers that were fueling the main fleet, which was doing the hard work, shooting down all the Japanese. And our job was to protect these tanks so they could find gasoline to go back and fight with. So that's what we were doing. And one time we were coming into Ulithi with our tankers, and it was pretty stormy. And there was a tanker and we had several destroyer escorts with us that could drop depth charges if we came across a submarine, or pick up some of our pilots that might have had to jump in the water, and we had a couple of those that had to be picked up. So anyway, we came in, and our carrier anchored, and there were other anchors, and Ulithi was the place where where we gained our supplies, and that's out in the middle of the Pacific. And we would get the new planes would be ferried in, all kinds of equipment to repair engines and all parts of the planes. Mail would come in, and food. Can't forget the food. And we did eat wonderfully there, except in the mornings. The green eggs, I got to the point where I wouldn't, if I had an early flight, I wouldn't even bother to eat, but we did have good food. So anyway, we're in there, and we dropped anchor, and these big tankers came in, and one of them anchored close, about from here to where the office is, I'd say a couple 100 feet from us. And I was on the back end of the carrier, and I was standing there. I can't remember whether it was early morning or late evening. And I was looking at this one tanker, and all of a sudden I saw a big flame shoot a good 100 feet up in the air, a big flame, and then black smoke, and then the thing broke in half. And then I heard guys yelling, and I could see them jumping off of the tanker. I didn't know until 50 years later when I saw it on television that there were 63 men that jumped off of the tanker into the ocean, but the ocean was on fire. And all of those men died. They were all burned to death,
So a torpedo? What hit the...
It was a Japanese torpedo. He came in through when they opened the gates for us, he apparently came in. It was a one-man sub. It was a big man-guided, they called it a Caden torpedo. And when he left, he says, I'm going to sink an aircraft carrier. And he was on our tail. They told us later, the Japanese did, that this is what he wanted to do, and this was a powerful thing. And the guy could not get maneuvered to get our tanker, our carrier. And so it was getting to the point where he had to do something, and that tanker was the only thing he could get to. So he rammed it, and that big, powerful thing just blew that thing all to pieces, and it sank. But millions of diesel fuel were all over the water. And when that thing exploded, the shock waves of it, I was standing, almost knocked me over. And our carrier, I could feel it shook like a dog coming out of water. And then they started dropping depth charges, sure. They started dropping depth charges all around there. But that guy had blown everything to pieces, And I understand now that at Ulithi they have made a monument, sort of like the one in Pearl Harbor, for the battleship Arizona. It was the last ship that they couldn't locate that had been sunk. And they were looking for that thing for the longest time, and they found out that finally somebody found it. And it had turned upside down because it had been blown so much in pieces. And so they were going to build a memorial for that thing, sort of, but not on the scale that the one in Pearl Harbor is.
Curiosity, I mean, how many hours did you end up having in the Hellcat?
Oh, I don't even know.
How many hours do you have flying total, you know?
Oh, flying total, I probably had about 2,000 hours. And in the Hellcat, maybe 5, 6, 7, I don't know. I never kept track of it. Somebody was supposed to be filling our logs, and I never kept track of it. I just, when it was my turn to fly, I flew. I'll tell you a rather humorous story. One morning, and we had a code with an Aldous lamp that we had to flash, you know, and we were told that where we were going to go, there would be no friendly planes, so or ships. So anything we saw was open target, you know. So this torpedo plane and myself, we took off, and we flew for quite a while. And it gets pretty boring out there, really, because you see nothing but sky and ocean. There's not one single landmark. And I'm flying wing on this guy, and I couldn't have seen a submarine if it ran into me almost, you know. And all of a sudden, I look over and I see rockets are coming out of the wing, and his gunner's shooting. Boy, that woke me up, and I said, hey, we got something going. And so I looked down and I see what looked like, well, the Japanese submarines have rendezvoused, and we happened on them. And boy, I'm going to see what these 650 calibers will do to one of these submarines. So I'm coming down on it, you know, and I'm letting all 650 calibers turn loose on that thing. And I'm thinking to myself, usually when they surface, they have a conning tower and they have a machine gun up there. Nobody's shooting at me. I don't see a conning tower on it. So I'm coming down and I look and I see this thing hump. I said, that submarines don't hump. Now I'm getting close enough to where I can see, oh my gosh, that's a group of whales. And this guy's still firing rockets. So I pulled off. Later on, I looked and found out that blue whales gather in that part of the ocean, and those things they can get over 100 feet long, and they weigh 1 ton to the foot. This is what was in the encyclopedia. So when I'm around a bunch of guys that are fishing, and they're claiming about all the big fish they caught, you know, I don't say anything till they're through. And then I say, well, guys, I caught a bigger fish than that. I say I got a bigger fish. They don't know the difference between caught and got, you know. And so I said, my fish was probably over 100 feet long and weighed 100 tons. And they look at me like I've been out for a quarter smoking weed or something, you know. And so I said, it's a true story. And I look them seriously in the eye, and they say, and then I tell them the truth, you know. They get a big kick out of that. So after we shot the whales, we went by one of the islands that our group had isolated. There were Japanese forces on it, but they couldn't get any supplies. We prevented them from getting any supplies. So I thought, I broke away from the torpedo plane and I dived down and got full throttle going, and I'm flying over this jungle, you know, and I could see a couple of them standing there, and I thought, if they take a shot at me, I'm going to do a wing over and come back and let them have it, you know. And so I looked down at them, and I kind of wiggled my wings. They were just looking up. And so I just kept going, you know. And I can't think, it was a well-known island, but I can't remember the name of it. So anyway, that's the end of that particular story.
Well, did you ever engage in any aerial battle with the Japanese? Or did
Well,
you see
okay,
them,
that's
or-
another story, and I'll tell you that story.
Okay.
I'll tell you another story prior to that one. We got a bogey on the radar screen, and we had our pilots were out doing their searching, but we always had a standby, two guys with one plane on the catapult, and we would stand by ready to go if the bullhorn said, "Pilots, man your planes on the double." You know, that's what they always did on the double. And so Huddler and I, Huddler was a full lieutenant, I was a GG. And we were sitting there, and all of a sudden the loudspeaker said, "Pilots, man your planes on the double." So he and I ran. He was on the catapult, and I wasn't, you know. So we got our planes going, and they shot him off, and then they got me on the catapult and shot me off. Remind me to tell you another story about that. And so they vectored us in on this bogey, and I'm flying wing on Huddler, and I look down. The guys on the radar did a beautiful job. They had us coming parallel in opposite directions to the Jap bomber. It was a Jap bomber, and he was coming down this way, and we were about 1,000 feet above him. And I thought to my heart started beating like crazy, you know. And I thought, man, we're going to get this guy. This is going to be a perfect high side run. All we have to do is roll over. He doesn't see us, and come down on him and let all 6 of those 50 calibers tear him to pieces, you know. But I could see Huddler just flying along, and I thought, oh my gosh, he hasn't seen him. And so I go right in close, and I wiggle my wings, and I look, you know, and he looks over, and I'm pointing down, and here's this Jap bomber about 1,000 feet below us, perfect position for a high side, and he goes right by us, and Huddler peels off. If I'd have been able to think quicker, I'd have throttled back, and then I'd have gone after him. But you don't have that much time to think sometimes when you're in this kind of a situation. So Huddler he goes down after him, and the Jap goes into a cloud, and I think he must have rolled that. It's like a B-25. It's called a Betty. And so I roll right after Huddler, and I'm coming down, and I'm looking at my rear view for this guy's escort, a 0 on my tail, you know. And I'm looking back there, and I don't see any 0, but I'm looking real fast. I've got my eye on this Jap bomber that I want to get. And he and Huddler both go into a cloud, so I go around the cloud, because it wasn't that big a cloud, and I thought with 3 of us in there, they're all free, liable to be in the same spot at the same time. So I thought I'll get him as he comes out of the cloud. And I come out of the cloud, and oh man, it scares the heck out of me because I can't find him, you know. And I thought, they'll come out behind me maybe. And I'm looking all around, and boy, I've got my guns I got pressure on the trigger. And I look, and I see a plane right low on the water going like the dickens. And I said, oh, there it is. And I had full throttle and right after him, you know. And I couldn't identify it. And I'm looking, and I got pressure. My first thought was to shoot. I could see my tracers going, and I was pretty sure I could kill the tail gunner on that thing, first thing, and then finish the rest of it off, because I was directly behind him. And I couldn't get a view of that plane, and I said to myself, my gosh, Huddler should be on his tail. And if I shoot that plane down, it'll be my buddy. I can't do that, you know. And I wanted that Jap so bad. And so I couldn't identify it, so I just pulled off. I was really angry. And I flew back to the carrier. And I was so angry. Huddler was there, and I was so darn mad that we hadn't gotten that bomber. I didn't even ask Huddler, where'd you go? What did you do? you know, you should have been on the tail of that thing, but here's the rest of the story. I'm in the ready room, the pilot's ready room, and the bullhorn comes over the loudspeaker and says there's a Jap plane making a run on the carrier, and he's about to make it. So I look up, and there's the roof of the carrier, and it's big timbers, it's all wood, and I thought, if he's got a machine gun and he's going to be shooting right down the middle of it, that's where I am. So I real quick ran out, and I'm in the catwalk, and I see this single-engine Jap plane come over about 100 feet over our carrier. He goes whoosh, right by. Never shot a thing, never dropped a bullet. And we had 4 guys ready to go, and one guy was on the catapult. They launched him right on the tail of this guy. There was another cloud. Those clouds were handy, and sometimes they were a handicap. And the Jap went on. We never saw him again. In fact, one of the guys on either one of the destroyer escorts or the tanker, I don't know what it was, they tried to shoot at it, and they dropped one of the big bullets that goes into one of the cannons, and it exploded and killed one of our own men. And so the Jap got away, and the guy that was on the catapult couldn't find him. And so that was a really weird thing. So then we got word from the big fleet that they had picked up a message from this Jap Betty that I was hoping to shoot down. And they said they're going to send kamikazes after you. They've got your location, and they're sending kamikazes. And so our captain of our ship said, well, can you send reinforcements to us? And they said, no, you're on your own. So now it's afternoon, and late afternoon. And so the skipper tells us that the kamikazes are coming for us, and that we're going to have to be up there ready to intercept them. So all of us fighter pilots were up there. And it's getting dusk now, and there are no landmarks at all to see anything. And so I'm all by myself up there. Well, I guess all the rest of them were too. We didn't, we weren't in formation. Every guy was for himself. And I'm up there, and I'm looking, and I see all these planes come over the horizon. And so my heart starts beating again, and I say, well, here they come. So I'm thinking about what's the best thing for me to do. And I said, the first thing is I'm going to climb and get another 1,000 feet. And so I did that, and they're coming in, and I'm looking, and I'm saying, I'm going to get the last guy, tail end Charlie, and then I'll do a quick wing over, and I can come back, and I should be able to get one more guy. And so I'm ready to roll down. I'm flying an FM2. And I look down, and ready to make my roll, and they're Hellcats. I said, what in the world? And so they went on. And so I just circled around. I'm waiting for the kamikaze guys, and it starts getting dark and dark. And they have a thing that says, 2 words that it'll come to me in a little bit, that means the ship, the carrier is ready to take on aircraft. So get ready to land. And I didn't hear that. So I'm circling up there, and it's getting dark. It's getting dark. Pretty soon it's like the screen there on my television. It's as black, and you can't see anything. You can't see where the horizon ends and where the ocean begins. So I get the word to come in and land. And so I dropped down. I couldn't see anything, but I saw 2 phosphorescent trails that I knew it was the propellers of the carrier that were energizing the phosphorescent water. And I knew that where it starts, it was bright because it was getting duller and duller. So I knew that was my carrier. So I came down, I couldn't see a darn thing. And I watched my altimeter to make sure that I didn't fly into the ocean. And so I look as I get to the end where I knew the carrier was, and I see what looks like a Halloween skeleton with no head. I knew it was the LSO. He had fluorescent tape on both legs coming up, and one coming up here and across his arms, and his paddles, of course, were fluorescent. And he was waving. I could see him waving to me. And so I couldn't see the carrier, so I moved over to the right side, and I steadied my elevation at 50 feet above the water, and I went so many seconds upwind, then I went less seconds crosswind, then downwind, and then I picked up the trails again, and I made a 180 to come in, and I positioned this skeleton between my cockpit and the wing, and that's where I would do it in the daylight, and I got the right perspective on it, came in and got the cut. I didn't know whether I was going to drop in the water and hear a splash or a thump. Thankfully, I heard a thump. And it was so dark. There was one of the air crewmen was on the deck with a pen light with a red cap, so it didn't show any light. But I could see the red cap, and they disengaged my hook, and I could see him do this to cut the engine. You know, he jumped up on my wing, and with this little flashlight, he said, "Follow me." So I got out, and I couldn't see it. I couldn't even see the deck. He showed it down, and we got into the catwalk and walked into the pilot's ready room, and then he went back. And I went in there, and I saw 3 or 4 pilots that I had never seen before. They were these guys that came to our rescue. There were about 6 of them that were in the front of the carrier, and they didn't have the benefit of those phosphorescent things, and they ran out of gas and were never seen again. And the next morning, early in the morning, I was on the deck, and the Ben Franklin came alongside of us, and what a mess that was. They had big holes. The carrier was on fire. They were fighting it with hoses, and I mean they were close because they swung across the breeches buoy because they wanted our doctors. All their doctors were killed. The captain of the ship was killed. The second in command was killed, and about 250 men were killed. And there were big holes in the deck and battered planes, wings laying all over the place. It was just a terrible thing to see, and I could have easily thrown a rock to the carrier. And they shot a line over, and our doctors and what crewmen we had went across. And I stood there looking at that like I was watching television, you know. And in the lower bays, they had 2 of them, and they were dumping bodies in the water, encapsed in some sort of a plastic thing with zippered up. And they had like a 4x6 plywood. One man would hold the American flag over him, and the other guy would tilt the plywood up and slide the body out. And that's the way they buried them at sea. And all the time that they were doing this, I was standing there watching them fight the fire and watching them bury about 200 and some odd guys in the ocean. And it was hard.